We'll go out to the Make It Right, Call Kyle Right hotline right now. Bring Matt Verderame of SI Now on to the hotline. Matt, thanks for joining us this morning. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Pretty good, pretty good. So the first question I want to ask you is, when you look at the Cleveland Browns job among the 25% of the NFL is without a head coach right now. Where do you rank the Cleveland Browns head coaching job amongst the rest?
I think every coach would give you a different answer because I think it depends on their priorities. But the reality is probably somewhere toward the bottom in the sense that, listen, I mean, there's no clear answer at quarterback. You know, Shedeur Sanders gave you some flashes. He also struggled at times. They have a team that, on one hand, looks Stefanski was there for a long time. So there's some patience and ownership, which is something that the Haslams didn't always have. I think that's a positive. But, let's just be honest. I mean, the Browns haven't been a good, successful franchise since the 1980s. And, if you're a coach, going in, look, it's going to be challenging. I mean, if you walk in there and look at the roster right now, it's a very good draft class this past year. I think that's clear, right? They nailed the draft class, which helps. But it's a roster that needs a lot of work. It is a roster that, offensively speaking, needs more pieces. The line, as you were just saying before I came on, look, you don't know what's going to happen there. There's a lot of flux. I think it's better than the Raiders' job in the sense that the Raiders have no continuity. I mean, Davis is paying like 5 different coaches right now. I think it's better than the Cardinals' job. I think it's even better than the Dolphins' job, frankly. But I'd probably slot it in above those three.
I think that's fair as a place to sort of have them land. I guess, Matt, as you sort of break down and look big picture on all these jobs and the coaching candidates that are out there, is there a candidate to you, and maybe it's the obvious answer, but that stands out above the rest that, as far as the Browns are concerned, maybe makes the most sense for them if they want to, as you said, get back to being that prominent organization that was well-respected in the 1980s?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious answer is Harbaugh, right? I mean, he did a great job in Baltimore. And look, I get it. You can sit there and poke holes in it. The last handful of years, like they underachieved in the playoffs. But John Harbaugh is a really good coach. He's got a ring on his finger. He's been incredibly successful. He obviously knows the division. Like, if I'm the Browns, I'm giving that guy what he wants. Like, what do you want? And by the way, that includes, like, if he wants to be in charge of, like, personnel decisions, then Andrew Berry can go find out a job. Like that, if I were Cleveland...
Yeah, I agree.
Because, first of all, I don't know why Andrew Berry still has the job, frankly. And if I was Cleveland and Harbaugh was like, look, I want to go there, but I want to be the czar, yeah, I'd have some concerns because there have been times where that's worked, times where it hasn't. I'm not letting Andrew Berry get in the way of me hiring John Harbaugh, period. Now, if he doesn't go there, if he doesn't want to go there, they can't come to agreement, then I think you start looking at, all right, look, I think you have to have somewhat of an experienced hand walking in there. I think you need somebody who understands what it is to be a head coach, whether that is a guy like a Mike McDaniel, who I honestly think is a very good coach who just kind of ran away with Tua in that organization. Whether it's somebody who you look at and say, okay, is it offensive or defensive? You got Brian Flores, who's a former head coach, who I think is incredibly well respected in the NFL. Somebody who's got the chops, who's to some degree been there and done it. I just think if you bring in somebody who's a first-time head coach, yeah, it could work, but they're going to have to learn the ropes like anybody else in a new job, and that's a challenging job. It's a job that I think experience would help with.
Matt, let me ask you this, because you said, if John Harbaugh was to come in here and say, you need to fire Andrew Berry, and you believe that the Browns should do that if that meant landing John Harbaugh. There's a report out there that Harbaugh wants $20 million a year, $10 million for his staff, and he wants to hire his own GM. If you look at the 8 head coaching jobs that's out there, I think all but one team already has a GM. So do you feel the same way if it was another team that was not the Browns, that if John Harbaugh said, if these is my list of demands, do you think any team that wants to hire John Harbaugh should fire their existing GM?
I'll tell you right now, I think the Giants ought to do it. I mean, if the Giants want him, and he says, well, I want Joe Shane out of here. I mean, I would tell Joe Shane, we'll help you pack. Bye. Like, I mean, yeah, I mean, what has he done to earn that job? I mean, I just think at some point, right, like this is about trying to win. And Andrew Berry's had years to build this team. What has he done with it? Now, granted, I loved their last draft class. I loved it when they took the guys, and it's panned out. They had a tremendous class. And we could talk all day about Watson and how much was that Berry, how much was that ownership. But in the end, it's on his resume. Fair or not, it is. Like, and yeah, if Harbaugh went to the Giants and said, hey, I love Jackson Dart, I love your front four, I think you guys have some talent, New York, big market, and I want to go there, but I want Joe Shane gone. Oh, he's gone. Gone instantly. Like, now, is that true of every team? No, there are other teams maybe not, but I'll tell you the same true with the Raiders. Nothing against John Spivak's only there for a year, but yeah, bye. Like, if Harbaugh wants to go to one of these teams, the Cardinals, by the way, are another one, although I can't imagine he'd go there, but like, yeah, Austin Ford, yeah. I mean, you've had years to prove that you're worth keeping, and you haven't. So, yeah, a lot of these teams, yeah, absolutely. I think he and Stefanski are the two best coaches out there. And if you can go and get one of those guys, I mean, there is no position in the sport more important than coach outside of quarterback.
Talking with Matt Verderame on the Make It Right, Call Kyle Wright hotline right now here on The Fan. Matt, I'm curious, as we talk through these different coaching candidates, and we've had some people sort of bring this name up to us today, where does somebody like Mike McCarthy fall into this discussion? Because we haven't seen his name really percolate much just yet. I know the Browns, the last time they went through this process when they hired Stefanski, did interview Mike McCarthy at that time. Has his name lost steam because he's now a two-time coach that flamed out? Or is he somebody that you think in the coming weeks is going to gain more traction?
I think he'll get some traction. Listen, McCarthy's one of those guys. He's not a sexy hire. Like, nobody's going to sit there and just write column after column about what an inspired hire it was. He's done nothing but win. Like, the guy has won a ton of, even in Dallas. Look, I think the Cowboys were justified in moving on. Like, it had kind of run its course, I feel like. But I'd also argue that winning with the Cowboys might be one of the 5 hardest organizations to win with right now, based on who the owner is and how he operates that team. Like, McCarthy went in there, took over a team that was not great, and won a ton of football games. Like, won over and over. And the only year he didn't win was when Dak was hurt. Every other year, he won. And then in Green Bay, again, won a Super Bowl, and I think everybody just looked at it like, well, he's got Rodgers, who wouldn't win. Well, how many other Super Bowls has Rodgers won? How many have you even been to? So, yeah, I mean, look, I think McCarthy, again, if I'm the Browns, I want a guy with experience. So obviously McCarthy checks that box, tenfold. Like, I want somebody who's going to come in there, who understands the quarterback position, who's got some experience. I think that, like I mentioned Flores earlier. I think Flores would be a very good hire, but he would have to come with somebody who's offensive minded. Like, he's got to pair himself with a really good OC. You need somebody to come in there, in my opinion, who understands what they're walking into, not just with the Browns in general, but in that job. Because that job is so much more than X's and O's. You are the ultimate CEO of a citywide organization that everybody's scrutinizing how you park your car and how you leave the building and everything in between it. Like, I think McCarthy would do that. Yeah, everything. Right. I mean, everything you do as a head coach of a National Football League team is just scrutinized to death. Like, I think McCarthy would be a good hire, and I think he would really be a good hire in Cleveland.
Let me ask you this about Brian Flores, right? Because he's a name that is on a lot of people's list as a guy who's no nonsense. They believe he will be a good CEO, as you just alluded to. But the pushback, for whatever reason, well, not for whatever reason, for obvious reason, is the defensive scheme that he is associated with, the 3-4 scheme. You look at the Cleveland Browns defensive personnel, a lot of those guys are under contract for multiple years, and we've had a lot of success in the 4-3. When you talk about Flores being a good candidate because he can be an overall CEO, do you believe that Flores can, adapt to different defensive schemes? I got to believe he's been around the NFL for so long that he knows just more than the 3-4. How does that play a part if he was to get this job?
Well, it does, and it's something that obviously the Browns and Flores would have to go over and figure out because, as you mentioned, look, the front seven is an extremely strong part of the Browns, obviously, and it's something that you don't want to mess with. I would say this: I think in today's NFL, that is a less scary thing than it was 20 years ago, where you were a 4-3 team or a 3-4 team, and that's how you play. We're now, I mean, let's face it, everybody's in the nickel. What, 70% of the game, right? Like, so I mean, really, look, I think you can adapt, right? Like, okay, instead of this guy standing up, he's got his hands in the dirt. I mean, they brought in Andrew Van Ginkel, they brought in Jonathan Grenard in Minnesota, they brought in Andrew Cashman, and like those guys had played in Van Ginkel had played in Flores' defense at times, but like those other guys had played in Houston, where that's a defense that was a 4-3 defense, and they came over and had immense success. So I think it's a conversation to have. I also think in today's day and age, there's so many sub packages and so many different ways to line up front. I don't know that that's the barrier that it was, like I said, 15, 20 years ago.
I think that's really well said. That's like important insight right there. Joining us on the Make It Right Call Kyle Wright hotline there's a lot of names we're throwing around here. Matt Verderame. We appreciate you giving us some time. I was going to ask. I was actually going to ask that same exact question, but I guess as a follow up to that, how much is it a barrier, especially when you're a team like the Browns who have so much to figure out on offense, hiring a defensive mind versus an offensive mind? Because we obviously know at this point, Matt, like so much in today's game is, do you have the right head coach, offensive minded wise, that you can pair with a quarterback, or are you going to risk losing? Like I just saw something the other day about how Tampa is now hiring like their 5th OC in like 4 years or something like that, and so like. The stuff we talk about here with Baker, where it was like Baker was here, he had 3 or 4 new OCs in like a 3 to 4 year span. That's continued for him now in Tampa. Like that's crazy. Like so, how much of that is a barrier when it comes to making these hires? Because we know like the defensive minded head coaches in this league are few and far between.
Yeah, and it's funny. Like this year, I think a lot of people thought coming into this cycle that defensive coordinators were going to be the ones who kind of dominated this thing. I mean, I think a lot of people thought Jesse Minter, Chris Shula, Brian Flores, Spagnuolo got a couple interviews. I think a lot of people thought, okay, this is going to be a year where there's not a ton of offensive guys out there. And then, of course, Stefanski becomes available. McDaniel becomes available. Harbaugh is actually a special teams guy from way back when. But, I mean, all of a sudden you're looking around going, oh, wow, okay, actually, there's some offensive coordinators who will be out there. And, of course, those guys are always going to be looked at first for all the reasons you laid out. I think, look, if you bring in a defense coach, you're bringing a guy like Flores. I do think, as I said earlier, you have to pair him with somebody who's almost an offensive head coach. It's somebody who you're going to pay that way as well. Like that way they're not just jumping ship. I'll give an example. In Kansas City, Andy Reid has obviously had immense success there. They treat Steve Spagnuolo like he's a secondary head coach. I mean, Andy Reid, I think I'm in the defensive meeting rooms in Kansas City as much as Andy Reid is. Like, Steve Spagnuolo is running that side of the ball. There is nothing Andy Reid doing other than going, hey, Steve, what are we going to do in this game? Oh, okay, we're going to do that? Great. Like, I think that's part of the reason he's been there, despite a bunch of interviews, is they treat him like he's an assistant head coach because he is. And I think there's some kind of, even like you look at Denver right now. Sean Payton has nothing to do with that defense. That is Vance Joseph's defense. That is that is his bread and butter. And so I think, look, you can look around the league. That has worked. That has worked well all over the place. And so I think, if a guy like Flores comes in, my first question, if I was interviewing, who is your offensive guy? Who are you trying to bring in? Because I think that's as important of a hire if you're going to bring in Flores as Flores himself.
All right, Matt. So we got a few more minutes here. I'll just ask you this. You are pretty well versed. You know your stuff, man. You really, really know your stuff. Your gut feeling, or I'll ask this 2 ways. Your gut feeling, one being, who do you think is going to ultimately end up being the head coach of the Cleveland Browns? And then 2, who do you believe is the right fit for the Cleveland Browns based on where you sit at?
Man, it's tough because there's so many openings and things just change quickly. You could want somebody and then somebody gets hired. or one assistant coach he thinks going to leave, he doesn't. Look, I actually think if you're the Browns, I would want an offensive guy in there for a lot of reasons, but in the end, I think Flores would be the right guy for the job, because I think Brian Flores is, first of all, I've interviewed Brian over a handful of times over the years. He's a smart guy. He's no nonsense. I think he's a culture setter. Like, you can say whatever you want. Look, it didn't work out in Miami, okay, and obviously afterwards there was some ugliness. Brian Flores took over a team in Miami that was atrocious. I mean, there were people who literally thought that team wasn't going to win a game. You go back and read the articles before the season started, and they're pretty good. But they were like a 500 team, and they had no quarterback. They had no real ownership. There has been kind of persona non grata for years. I think if you get a satisfactory answer as to who he would pair himself with on the offensive side of the ball, I think he'd be a really good coach. I really do. I think that what happened in Miami, I actually think the job he did there was underrated. And I just look at him and say that's a guy who can come in and change things, not just schematically. He can change things in terms of the way the building works, and that's something that I think a lot of times when you've been bad for a while, that's the hardest part of it. If you can do that, you can find talent. It's changing the culture. And I think Flores would be a home run for the Browns in that regard.
Ooh, clip that, Keith. Clip that. Yo, Matt, man, we appreciate you for taking time out your Saturday to join us right here on The Fan. We appreciate you, man.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You got it. Anytime.